Hello everyone, it's Marc Sabatella from the Mastering MuseScore School here. Welcome to the Music Masterclass. We are wrapping up our discussion of spring and all the spring songs people have been creating, which is great. If you still have some spring songs in you, feel free to keep writing. But we got some nice submissions today. I want to look at them and also take a look at Appalachian Spring, one of the classics of the genre, because I make reference to this thing pretty often. So thanks everyone for kind of checking in and saying where you're from. I love kind of seeing the community we're building here, and I'll have plenty more to say about community building in the next couple of weeks. So that's my little teaser. But I'm going to just go on here and look at Appalachian Spring. So I want to. I forgot to bring up my phone to make sure I can A, follow the chat, and B, that everything is working. So give me 1 second while I stall and do that. Everything looks good. All right, good. So here's what I want to talk about as far as Appalachian Spring. So for people who aren't aware, Aaron Copland is, usually held up as like the quintessential American composer, and he wrote a lot of music with a lot of different, types of things going on harmonically, stylistically, and all. But the music that he is most famous for are a series of pieces he wrote uh, that are uh, using American folk music, basically, either actual American folk songs or trying to convey a sense of Americana, the American experience, whether it's the Western music or whatever else was going on. And when I say Western music, I mean the American West music, cowboy songs, and so forth. Or in some cases, like there was a whole suite of music of Mexican music. And so he does a lot of other, or did a lot of other things also, but this is the music he is most known for. And the reason I am bringing it up is uh, he has a certain way of dealing with counterpoint. And since I've been talking about counterpoint a lot, I've made reference to this often, but I've never really shown an example. And well, what better time than right now while we're wrapping up talking about spring to look at Appalachian Spring and see what I'm talking about. So this is a particular section. Oh, so first of all, the score here, this is a wonderful thing that someone has done. And I'm just going to post the link. Someone actually entered all of Appalachian Spring into MuseScore. And this is, this wonderful thing about the whole MuseScore community and the fact that this exists in the world, that there's a whole lot of music that if you're interested in, someone else is probably interested in also. Did I spell that right? I don't know. Because I don't know how to spell Appalachian. Appalachian. Yeah, that looks right. Okay, so someone has entered the whole score. And I actually, so in the score itself, it's transposed. So you'll see key signatures varying according to the instruments, right? So I'll zoom in here so you can see it on musescore.com. You'll see that the brass, the different instruments, these clarinets here are, notated the way they transpose. However, for analysis purpose, it's so much easier for me, and I assume for most people, to look at things in concert pitch. So I've turned on the concert pitch button. So we're seeing everything at notated pitch, and I mean at the actual sounding pitch. So this portion of we are at this point 300, what is that, 500 measures in? My gosh, that's a big score, right? 500 measures in to the score. This is a song called Simple Gifts, right? It's kind of it's not really a folk song. I don't know who actually composed it. I should know that. Someone could look that up and let us know. But it's it's sort of a song of the that's typical in American church music. And so he uses that theme, and let's hear what he does with it. So I'm going to start here, and you can kind of see what's going on in the brass. All right, and obviously my computer is having trouble keeping up with the playback while broadcasting, but hopefully you get the idea. It's actually "'Tis a Gift to Be Simple." That's maybe the actual title of the song. So it's a Shaker hymn, yes. And I don't know, like a lot of those hymns, yeah, came from earlier music and then were adapted, having lyrics put to it. And I don't know the actual history of that song in particular. So this melody, let me scroll up so we can see it. Right, that's the basic melody. And then when it comes in for the second strain of that melody, it continues in the low brass there. It's a trombone. Um, Meanwhile, the trumpets, horns, and trumpets don't come in. I guess it's just horns and strings come in with that same melody, and it's easier to see just looking at the horns here. They come in with that melody offset by one measure, right? So this is imitative counterpoint. So you hear boo da 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 dum, and two beats into it, you get da 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 dum. So it's stretto or stretto to pronounce it more Italianly. um, it's the melody being used in imitation with itself, staggered like that. So the melody, the second voice comes in before the first voice has finished. It's just two beats in. And the thing that makes this sort of uniquely Copland-esque to me is it's totally diatonic. The melody is diatonic, right? There's no secondary dominants, no accidentals in the melody, and the harmonization stays extremely static. If you listen to what's happening in the harmonies here, it's basically just kind of re-emphasizing the one chord with hints of the 4 and 5 as necessary. But there's not attention to detail of exactly how these notes are lining up, as far as where there's dissonance, where there's consonance. What we're doing instead is relying on the sheer diatonicity of it. Is that a word? Diatonicness. The sheer fact that everything is so clearly in the key that it's in G flat here, right? Because this is bass clef, G flat. Uh, the fact that it is so clearly in G flat, this wash of G flatness kind of comes over us, and we hear key of G flat without having to worry about or focus on what chords are actually being formed by this. And in some ways, that's a very ancient technique, right? It's like an early Renaissance technique of really not thinking about chords. But usually when we think about this sort of technique, we're thinking about a fugue and we're thinking about all the sort of Baroque harmonies that would happen. And that's not what's happening here. So let's just listen to that passage again. So again, apologies for the fact that this is a huge score here, and computer. It works fine when I'm not broadcasting live, is all I can say. So that is. I don't know. It's just an interesting observation that this style of music, where you can take an essentially diatonic music, melody, and just put it in counterpoint with itself, almost without worrying about how the harmonies line up. I mean, there's places where if you actually do the math on this and look at the intervals, you'll see, oh, look, it really does resolve dissonances in traditional ways. But there's places where it really doesn't. I wish I could remember. Like there's just certain places where it lines up nicely, and other places where it lines up. Nothing about that passage is how Bach would have planned it. Because we have B flat here, against A flat there. We have A flat here against B flat here, and not used in a way that's harmonically significant. They're just pitches. And so this sound is a sound you can use, and I've alluded to it when I see people writing in a way that sounds like this. I'll say, "Oh yeah, that reminds me of Copeland," but I've never actually been able to give the example. So anyhow, that's the example. So I am going to just speak to the question of enharmonic spelling. Again, it's something that the internet is full of information about. So I'm just going to point you to my basic theory course right here. And I will say, enroll in this and study the first few lessons. Those questions will all be answered. I can't answer them in words here without explaining all the background. So please enroll in the course, study the lessons, and then your questions will be answered. So anyhow, that's what I wanted to show you about Appalachian Spring, this particular style of counterpoint that relies on a melody being diatonic, and the fact that you can take any combination of those pitches and sound them simultaneously, and we'll hear a cluster of diatonic sounds, and it creates a sound that we can enjoy independently of following all the sort of intricacies of the tension and release that counterpoint would normally be all about. This is a different type of counterpoint, and it's a very valid counterpoint style, and when I see it happening, I always find it really interesting. So what I would say is, this is something to sort of have in the back of your mind as something you can use. You can use it with diatonic melodies. If your melody is atonal, then you never have to worry about consonance and dissonance, because it's not that you never worry about it. You do think about it, but atonal melodies, you can take the same thing and take an atonal passage and just put it in counterpoint with itself without worrying about those details either. But normally when we're writing music that's more explicitly tonal with chord progressions and tonicizations of things, then you have to think a little harder. So I'm going to turn to this. So I've got a few different pieces queued up that people have written that are relating to spring. And so Kika, you've had this piece up there for a while, and it wasn't downloadable, and I got you to make it downloadable, so I managed to download it, and I'm going to post the link to this piece. So this piece is really, everything is just really interesting. I just love when people create music, and Kika's spring piece here. All right, so there we go. So this piece I know very little. Well, I know nothing about, right? I listened to a good chunk of it. I didn't listen to all of it. It's 3 minutes long. We're going to listen to it now. Hopefully it won't tax my system the way Appalachian Spring did. In fact, I'm going to close Appalachian Spring here to get me some RAM back. All right. So I'm going to play just the opening, and then I'm going to stop for a second. All right, I'm going to stop right there. So right away, Kika, I have to ask if you're referencing anything in particular with that opening. I remember you had posted a piece a while ago that related to a Sonny Rollins improvisation. So I'll tell you what instantly came to my mind when I heard that, and that is the overture to Jesus Christ Superstar.
Those emotions, they were put on hold by time. But at Claire's bridal weekend at a Virgo.
Okay, here we go. There you go. That's the opening to Jesus Christ Superstar. So to me, that was extremely reminiscent in style. Louder. Let me do. Oh, first of all, Thank you. Okay, reset my volume here. I'm going to play it with the notated volume, the notated dynamics, but I've reset my volume here on the play panel. So let me just play, and hopefully this will be loud enough. All right, I really enjoy this piece. So, so if it was still quiet, I never know how things sound to you. I did turn up my master volume here. It'll probably be too loud for other people's pieces, so hopefully I'll remember to turn it down. Okay, so Kika, feel free to tell us anything else you want to tell us about it. William, you have a question about things showing up. Yeah, there's always a delay. So everything that I broadcast is it shows up about 10 seconds after I'm saying it, but I think the chat is instant. So that's what's happening. There's a delay in broadcast. Okay, so yeah, there's a lot of cool things going on here. I'm going to switch to continuous view to make it easier to talk about. So, Kika, your question in where you actually have the piece here, where is it? Was about the chords. And so he says you chose chords and you're curious what other chords could be appropriate. Well, I mean, my off the cuff answer is I wouldn't be thinking too much about chords on this. I mean, first of all, what would the point of the chord be? The chord symbols could be there to allow a pianist or guitar player to actually provide accompaniment. But I feel like it's proportioned the way you want. Like, I don't think you want anything here but your pedal point and melody. I don't think you want a pianist or guitar player playing chords there. I mean, maybe you do, but I don't know that it would be better for it. So, I don't know. If I actually turn on the playback of these chord symbols, I'm curious. I didn't try this yet, but I am curious to see what it's going to sound like. I'm not guessing that it's going to improve it. So that changed it to me. I mean, that really changed the harmony to me because the E naturals that are sounding in these chords don't My ear wasn't filling in that way. My ear heard this as minor, and maybe it's because I'm associating it with Jesus Christ Superstar. But my ear totally heard this as a more minor sound. So already I got surprised by the major sounds. And I could get used to that. If that's what you were hearing in mind, then maybe you would want to be explicit about it. But I would maybe just be explicit about it by writing in your E naturals in another part. So the two purposes of chord symbols would be, one, to allow a rhythm section instrument like piano or guitar or bass to provide accompaniment without having to write it all out. But the other purpose would be to give an improviser a harmonic framework to improvise over. And I'm not convinced that that's helpful either here. I don't think chords chords are great things to improvise over if the music is based on chords. But if the music isn't based on chords, I think I would rather have different structures to improvise over. Like, I might rather be told just what the bass line was, or are you overall going for a minor tonality or a major tonality, or are you going for a quartal tonality where maybe the chord sound is built, I'm using air quotes here, is built in fourths instead of thirds, or are you going for a more cluster sound? Like, once we get to this sound, this section over here, that feels too loud to me now, right? I feel like that's probably too loud. So I'm going to come down a little bit. So you're talking about an E flat chord. I am in concert pitch mode. Wait a minute. Am I in concert pitch mode? Okay, so something seems off here, and I'm not sure what's going on. But with concert pitch off, I see everyone having the same key signature. And with concert pitch on, I see that's not the case. So somehow things have gotten... Oh, wait a minute. Nope, it seems backwards. So somehow the transposition has gotten off. In concert pitch, I should expect to see all my key signatures the same. And then with concert pitch off, then I should see them different. So my guess is, here's a guess, that you wanted it to all look like there was no key signature, because it's atonal. And that's fine. That's a good thing to do. But instead of making it be in C major and then having it transpose, what you want to do instead is use the atonal key signature. So this will make it so that when I switch to concert pitch mode, there's still no key signature. That's how you want it to be. So yeah, that's a thing to be aware of, that atonal key signature is specifically for this sort of situation. So I'm in concert pitch mode here. So that part, I will grant. That sounds like an E flat chord. Actually, yeah. Here, instead of calling this C sharp, I'd have called it D flat. Because enharmonic spelling wise, for our enharmonic spelling friend here, that spelling matters. E flat 7 is E flat, G, B flat, D flat. Line, 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 or space, 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 every other letter name. So we would want that 7th to be spelt with a D flat, because it is going to make a difference. And one of the reasons it makes a difference is, if you think about like what this is written here, you can see now that this is a step from E flat to D flat. And by seeing it as a step, it psychologically sets you up to understand that it's only a step. And so as a pianist, it prepares you to use your next finger over rather than two fingers over. As a brass player, it kind of prepares you to expect that you're going to play both notes with the same embouchure, or at most loosen up one partial to go down. When you spell things a little off, it fools you into thinking, oh my gosh, I better open up my mouth more because this is a big leap down here. Not a big leap, but a little leap. And in point of fact, those two notes might be in the same partial. I don't actually know, but that's the sort of thing. So for pianists, it's which finger are you sort of priming yourself to play, and then you go to play that note and realize, oh, if it was spelt C sharp, it's actually too. Yeah, I put the wrong finger down, but by now it's too late, and you just have to make up the difference somehow. So that's one of the differences, and also then for a singer seeing this to be able to see as a step. So this is one of the reasons why enharmonic spelling matters, and why it is important to be able to ask and answer questions about enharmonic spelling, because it does actually matter. So anyhow, you have an E flat chord here. I would say at this point, a chord has changed, and I don't know what that chord really is, but I feel like there's a missing chord here. And what it sounded to me like, and both the brass have a D, right? D, D, but somehow, and we have the D here, I think it's the A natural here that I'm hearing that's actually giving it an F major sound. And so I'm looking at, I think I heard this F, this F, this F, and this A, and actually heard an F major triad despite all those Ds. So I kind of heard it's going from E flat to F major. Now the D is maybe a non-chord tone. It's at the end of the measure here. Maybe it's just an anticipation of the next chord, or maybe it's really turning it into a D minor chord. I'm not so sure. But anyhow, those are some of the things you'd have to think about, because here, this section, it feels like chord-wise, you do have something you can tell us about with chords. So what happened is, so Kika, I don't actually know what happened. Normally, if you just start your score, it'll be, and you just use, and you don't tell it any other key, you just tell it C major. It'll show as C major if concert pitch is on, but it'll show with accidentals if concert pitch off. So I'm wondering if you maybe tried to delete key signatures to fix that or something. It's hard to really know. So the squiggly line here, that's a good question. I assume that's some sort of guitar notation. I believe I've seen that on the articulations palette. Is it one of these guys? Yeah, it's this guy right here. So it's a vibrato marking. Yeah. So, oh wow, that's cool. About I just was looking in the comment here about seeing Aaron Copland 12-tone symphonic work. Yeah, there's an amazing piano sonata by Copland. It's one of my favorite pieces of music I've ever heard in my life. Was hearing a performance of the Aaron Copland piano sonata. But it's also, it's not 12-tone, but it's quite atonal. It's nothing like this Americana music we were just listening to. So yeah, so there is a sense in which I am hearing like your own personal interpretation of a chord progression that I could almost understand. Like, okay, let me tell you what I'm hearing. 1, 2, minor 2, 5, and then it goes to atonal. But that 1 to dominant 2 to minor 2 to 5, that's like Girl from Ipanema. It's like Take the A Train. It's like a million jazz standards that open with that, but it's so abstracted that it's really hard to recognize that that's what's going on. And so I'm really superimposing my own whatever on, my own experience onto this to tell me, well, it kind of sounds like that kind of chord progression. But mostly it's not as tonal as that. So I would say if you're going to put chord symbols to things, you should write to those chord symbols, and like nothing about that sounds like a C major chord, in part because you land on a big flat E flat here, a big fat E flat, which to me sounds great. But the fact that there's an E natural for a moment in there doesn't make me think that this sounds like a C major chord. So I would say, yeah, pick a side here. You're either writing music that's got chords, or you're writing music that doesn't have chords. If you're writing music that has chords, be true to the chords. If you're writing music that doesn't, then don't mess with the chords. I'm not telling you what you have to do, but I am saying that it's hard for me to advise when you're in this sort of no man's land in between here. So that's a suggestion. Now here we're back to that original sound, right? This da, 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 but with all this rhythm here. Let me come back to it. This feels like some sort of like march, like we're coming to the trio section of a march. The rising. Dun, 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 dun. Except this is bum, 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 bum. It starts and strikes forever, but it's not, right? So, but it's referencing some of the same gestures, and I guess one of the points I would make here is even when music is as atonal as this, these gestures, and that is a term absolutely that is used in the world of atonal music, especially like in jazz improvisation for people who are doing free jazz improvisation, as well as people who are doing classical composition in an atonal way. If you're strictly working within a 12-tone system specifically, then it's more regimented. But if you're dealing with a freer sense of things, then the idea of talking about a gesture, like something going up, that's a gesture. And anything you write that says going up could be a valid expression of that gesture. So what you have here is this gesture that reminds me of that figure in a march. So that rhythmic pulse to it, the fact that we're hearing a snare drum underneath it, the fact that we hear this rhythmic thing happening and the ascending scale that's kind of happening in it, it has that same gesture that I expect to hear in a march. And the reason I'm talking about this is the gestures are what's important. That's what gives the music its logic. That's, if you're not going to be based on chord progressions and having harmonies that make sense by Western standards, these are the things that you do to say, I'm creating something that uses this familiar gesture, even though the harmony isn't so familiar. The melody perfectly is. I mean, the melody here is a chromatic scale, right? I mean, that's a familiar sound melodically. And all the counterpoint and stuff that's going on here now of multiple things happening at once, it's giving it a really lovely texture. And notice how before we had more instruments playing, but they were working together in a way. Right? We have all the instruments playing, but 3 of them have the exact same rhythm. And these 2 rhythms here, the clarinet and guitar, have kind of interlocking rhythms that basically just gives you a steady stream of 16th notes. Da-ka, 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 da. Right? It's a steady stream of 16th notes in the guitar and clarinet, and this triplet rhythm in the brass. So it really feels texturally like there's only 2 different things going on. I'll ignore the drums for now. But there's texturally, there's the 16th note stream between guitar and clarinet, and there's the triplets that the brass have together. When we get to this, I would claim that even though there's fewer instruments, it's a denser texture because there's more, right? These 2 instruments, the clarinet and the trombone, have the same rhythm. But we have the guitar doing something different, the tuba doing something different still, the trumpet, when it comes in, doing something different still, and now the fact that the drums are doing its own thing now also is yet another thing. And so it's really nice that the texture actually thinned as far as how many instruments are playing, because it's already quite chaotic. There's like 3 or 4 different things going on at once already. So it's good to leave that kind of space. You can have 20 instruments all playing at once, and it sounds very organized if they're rhythmically together. If everyone has independent rhythms, then you probably only want to have three things going on at once, maybe at most four. And maybe you have two instruments together rhythmically, and that counts as one thing conceptually. So anyhow, I like the way that is working out texturally there. So in any case, yeah, there's just a lot of nice things going on texturally here, coming to a big climax there, and then breaking down again. And now building this new texture of a repeating rhythm. And those felt somewhat chordal too, right? So what's happening here, I'll buy that as a chord. This is an E major chord. I'll totally buy that is an E major chord with a B in the bass. Maybe you want to spell that as G sharp, though, if you want to tell me it's an E major chord. So improvising wise, here is a place where I probably would give a chord symbol and say if someone wants to improvise over this or provide accompaniment on, rhythm guitar, basically, or piano, that's a fine chord symbol. Yeah, so just really nice things happening in there. So as I do see a good questions and answers about guitars and tremolo bars, whammy bars, and things like that, and the foot pedals that people use for effect. So that's not my world. So I hope that you all are asking each other and answering each other's questions there and getting good stuff. I really like the little snare solo in here. It's really kind of nice. And here it's like this pyramid texture. So again, I'm going to refer to the gesture of what's going on. There's a figure that happens a lot it happens in jazz, it happens in not symphonic. Well, it happens in symphonic music. Concert band is really marching band, concert band, jazz band. Band music is where I get the sound from, where you have a low instrument come in, and then while it sustains that note here, it's basically this sound that we're getting right here. We get the low note come in, and then another note comes in on top of that, and then another note comes in. So we're building up a chord by having one note come in at the beginning of the measure, the next voice comes in. If I broke this tie here, it would actually be more like that pyramid texture. So we get boo, e, e, except this is a cockeyed pyramid. Normally it would go bottom to top, lowest voice, then the next voice up, then the next voice up, then the next voice up, each coming in kind of staggered and then sustaining the note. So that's kind of a typical texture that you see a lot in, especially, like I said, band music. So this is referencing that texture, even though it's not specifically building up a chord and it's not specifically going bottom to the top, but it has this idea of long notes kind of staggered. Now, I should mention, notationally, you would not want to notate these as tied eighth notes. In fact, if I just select these measures and run Tools, Regroup Rhythms, that's what it should look like. That is much more correct. This, not so sure about this measure here. What time? Oh, we're in 6/8. So yeah, okay, if we're in 6/8, that's good. So in any case, there's things about the notation of the rhythm that's a little funny. And right here, you've got these tied quarter notes, which is also odd. If this is 6/8, it should be written one way. If it's 3/4, it should be written a different way. I feel like the guitar at this point is thinking more 3/4. That's a quarter note, a half note, and a quarter note, because that's what's really going on. It's like the guitar is in 3/4, and you can do that, by the way. You can totally have the guitar in a different key signature, a different time signature than everyone else. You press Control while adding the key signature, but you can't do it after you've already got notes in the measure, so it's too late now. But if I want to rewrite this to be correct for 6/8, it would look like this, but this is weird. It doesn't convey what's actually going on as well as seeing this. And so I actually would just notate that as a half note, notate this as a half note, because conceptually the guitar is not dealing with 6/8, it's dealing with 3/4. And it's actually dealing with 2/4, 2 beats, 2 beats, 2 beats, 2 beats. It's a hemiola feature. It's a hemiola figure. superimposed in 6/8. So it's really kind of a complex thing going on rhythmically. Okay, so what I'm going to do, so yeah, that's, and then it kind of finishes out by reducing the texture, which is kind of a orchestrated fade out. Come down to just the original pitch, the original theme, and then end it. Right, so it's really nicely structured, I think, and coming back to the beginning. This idea of starting with a theme and then bringing it back. I'm gonna talk about Sonata Form probably next month more. So, love the piece. Thanks, Kika, and hope that some of my comments might have proved useful. And but I like what you're doing. Okay, so now for something completely different. So Dean has this piece here that is, as he described it, it is. Let me bring up the. Here it is. This is Dean's spring song, and it's silly. It is silly. The lyrics are what's silly. The music isn't silly. The lyrics are deliberately silly. And what makes them extra silly is how, like, totally disjointed they are from the music. So the music here is actually based on Bach's Prelude in C major. So right, that piece that you've probably heard a million times, most of you. And if not, you'll hear something that's obviously based on it. And he's got a really nice thing going on harmonically, really nice things going on textually, really beautiful melody on it, and really silly lyrics. And so let's hear. By the way, I have repeats turned off when I'm doing these, so pieces we can hear the whole piece. Okay, beautiful job, Dean. So yeah, hopefully you were following the lyrics on there. They're fun. It's just really fun lyrics because they're, it's like bringing in all these cliches and then turning them around, twisting them, finding interesting rhymes within them, and telling a little story. And it's just all really clever and well done. So I'm the thing is, so I'm gonna wait for 1 second here while I also see, Sam, did you get your piece downloadable yet? Because I really want to download your piece and be able to play it in here, because there's interesting parallels between there we go, download. Thank you. There's interesting parallels between these two pieces. So I actually kind of want to talk about them together a little bit and talk about the parallels. So if you don't mind, Dean, I'm going to put that on hold for a second, and we're going to hear Sam's also, and I'm going to talk about some of the similarities between them as far as the things that I might want to talk about. It's not that similar. Well, it's similar in some ways. So anyhow, let's hear it. Okay, beautiful job, Sam. I just love the piece. So, I said that these pieces have some things in common, and I suppose I should, well, I want to ask you, what do you see that they have in common? I mean, obviously they're very different in a lot of ways too, but I'll tell you what I hear as a similarity. A couple points of similarity that are worth pointing out. First of all, they're speaking a very similar harmonic language. They are both using this language of this sort of jazz pop chord progression-y kind of a thing. In particular, so like, these F add 9 chord, right? That's that kind of sound. Those prominent major ninths that are, the prominent ninths that are in the chord. And that's kind of, throughout. There's lots of places where there's like this major 7th chord. There's lots of prominent major 7ths and, use of that kind of language throughout Dean's Silly Spring Song. And then in Sam's piece, he's speaking that language also quite explicitly, B flat 6 9 chords at F6 and 9. So these idea of these chords that have these color tones and things, and just the overall types of chords being used are similar. But then also, if I take which one am I going to do it to? I'm going to take Sam's piece and just temporarily transpose it to F. Oh, I see you have no key signature here. Okay, so I'm going to have to do some math on this. So I want to go, I'm going to go down a 4th. Okay, so if we look at the actual chords, like where the melody comes in, I'm going to go to continuous view here. Make it a little easier for me to follow where the melody is coming in. Here it is. Okay, so there it is transposed. Yeah, it's getting a little muddy. It's actually kind of interesting in some ways too, where those voicings sit. But in any case, if we actually follow the chords F to D to G minor to C, 1 6 2 5, and then eventually, we're gonna keep out following circle of fifths. We got a little secondary dominant A7 tonicizing that D minor chord, and then we have this modulation B minor to E7 to A major, right? We've got a lot of these kinds of sounds, but we also get, let's see, we're in, oh, shoot. What did I do? I obviously did something goofy. The key signature didn't transpose. Oh, it transposed wrongly. Well, that's because the key signature was out of sync with the actual key. That's what was happening, right? Because you had C as a key signature or atonal maybe as a key signature, but you were clearly writing in B flat mostly, and that is definitely a thing. In because the piece does kind of modulate, I would have recommended the atonal key signature. So when I transposed, you still had no key signature, but I'm gonna ignore that for the moment. My point is, at some point, there's modulations to D flat major here, from F to D flat. That's the flat 6 chord. And then we have our basically minor 4 chord here, if we think of key of F, B flat minor to C to F, minor 4 to 5 to 1. Well, that's the same language that Dean's talking about too. He's got these tonicizations, D7 going to G minor. So he's speaking that same harmonic language. He also has that minor 4 chord coming back to 1. He's got a tonicization of the B flat minor chord. They're using a lot of the same chords once you put them in the same key to make that easier to see. So in any case, I'm going to undo that transposition because I just wanted to make that point that they really are using a lot of the same chords once you do that transposition. And so that's something that they have in common. Another thing they have in common is the use of the strings. And not just the fact of using the strings, but using how they're using them. So they're using I mean, most of the activity here is being carried in the melody. Now, this is obviously not as rhythmic of a piece, right? This is more of a flowing kind of piece. But there's an interesting irony, or maybe it's not even irony, maybe it's just a fact about it. Let me make sure you can see the whole staff here, the whole system. This line, right, and similar lines throughout. This is a very slow-moving piece, tempo-wise, right? Like the actual tempo, what was it, like 50 or something? So it's a very slow-moving piece as far as the tempo goes. The strings are moving basically in half notes with some quarter notes and very occasional eighth notes. This is the style of accompaniment that I sometimes have referred to as writing footballs. That's just an arranger's slang for basically giving strings whole notes or the equivalent thereof. So here they're not actually whole notes because the chords are going, the tempo is slow enough, the chords are changing every 2 beats, so you're giving them half notes mostly, but it's basically one note, one sustained note per chord. And strings can do that all day long. Strings can totally do that all day long. And this is also what Sam's doing, right? The strings here are just, in this case, dotted footballs. Right, so I'm singing rhythms here. I'm kind of singing the viola part, but I'm in the wrong clef, so I'm not really singing the viola part. It's beautifully voice-led footballs is what we're talking about here. And that's what Dean has going too here. Very beautifully led footballs. I'll sing the violin 2 part. Whoa. Okay. So what you've got happening here is a major 7th on that chord, right? So there is a clash between this A natural and that A flat. You might want to decide, which do you mean, right? They're both actually, in point of fact, very appropriate on a minor 4 chords. On minor 4 chords, such as this is, if you think about the fact that this is borrowed from F minor, well, then the A flat makes total sense. But if you think about the fact that we're actually in F major, the A natural makes sense. A common thing to do to kind of resolve that is to say, let's not even focus on the 7th. Let's make that be a 6th chord. So very often you'll see people write B flat minor 6 and voice the chord that way. But in any case, there's a little clash there, and that's why my brain saw the chord symbol, sang a note, saw that note, and came to a halt because I wasn't doing it right, because there's that disconnect. But in any case, it's beautifully, whether this is an A natural or an A flat or a G for that matter, it's a really nicely voice-led series of footballs written for the second violin part. And as I said, strings can do that all day long. And one thing that I've learned over the years is that strings and synthesizers can do that all day long. And it's called a pad when you do it for strings, right? You write, in fact, the sounds that we use for it on a synthesizer are usually called pad, string pad, atmospheric pad, whatever. And it's meant to be these long sustained notes that you could hold as a chord. And one of the defining features of a synthesizer pad is it has a long release. So even after you take your keys off the synthesizer, the sound carries on for like another second or so. So you hear ba. It doesn't go ba. It goes ba. So the sound gradually dies off. That allows you to go ba-da-dum, and lift up your whole hand. So even if you're not able to play that series of chords super smoothly, you can just pick up your hand, move to the next chord, and the pad sound will kind of wash it together. So that's how synthesizers do that sort of thing. So you can write synthesizer pads that are playable even if you can't physically connect the chords smoothly. So strings can do this, as I said, all day long. And what I mean by all day long is you don't need to breathe. You don't need to give them space to breathe. You can have the viola do nothing but half notes and whole notes and not worry about, well, where are they going to breathe? They breathe while they're playing, right? You can't write this way for winds. And so a comment came in, I think it was on Sam's piece, but it could have been on either of them, that, gee, could this have been written for winds? And the answer is, well, no, not literally. You'd have had to give them space to breathe. And I don't just mean catch an occasional quick breath. I mean, you're going to get lightheaded. If you try to write nothing but dotted half notes, I don't care how often you put little breath marks in, or how often the brass players decide, I'm going to sneak a little breath between these two chords, they're going to be lightheaded and pass out after about 32 bars of playing nothing but notes without a time to take a real deep breath. So you can't write extended periods of footballs like that for wind instruments. It just doesn't physically work for the players. So this use of this technique is very appropriate for writing for strings. Now, I say it's appropriate. I'm not saying it's the only way of writing for strings. There's certainly things you can do other than writing footballs. But it's a nice, easy, and effective technique if you don't assume that that's your interest. This is just filling out the chord. In Dean's case, it's the piano that's providing the real interest in the accompaniment. Right? The arpeggiation in here is what's doing the thing, and this counter melody in the flute, which is really beautiful. Right? All these little beautiful counter melodies in the flute. That's sustaining a lot of interest there. That combined with the piano, this is just kind of background stuff, and it's serving a nice function. It provides that kind of wash of sound that's very much a part of, not so much necessarily a part of the jazz vocabulary, but definitely a part of the pop vocabulary. That sort of wash of sound, those pad sounds that became really popular when synthesizers became on the scene in the 60s and 70s. So, and not that the people wrote that way for strings before that also, like, pop string arrangements, arrangements behind, whether it's Frank Sinatra or whoever's, pop singers of the 40s and 50s with strings behind them, you'll hear a lot of that same football type of writing. So here it's the rhythm section. It's the piano, the bass, and the drums that are providing all the rhythmic interest. And so we don't need the strings to do anything but what they're doing. I will say, I don't know if you were literally expecting, Sam, all these to be double stops, but I wouldn't do that. I wouldn't expect one violin player to play a nonstop series of double stops like this. Even if they're all individually playable, it feels not sustainable to me. And maybe a real string player could tell me differently. But I feel like if you meant this to be two violins and you just wrote them on one staff to save space, that I think is probably more to the point. Like, this is a string quartet, and so that's two separate violins that you just wrote on one staff. So if that's what you meant, I approve. But if you're actually expecting a violin player to play all those double stops, it's not that it is a little physically taxing, some of them, to the finger positions you have to sustain. It's not necessarily difficult, but again, a whole piece full of them would be. So whether or not that's what you intended, that's my advice to people. Double stops are more effective used not in that sort of pad setting where you're going to be using a lot of them, because it makes it more like that thing, because now you have to like move two fingers from one chord to the next. And that's kind of like the situation of the synthesizer there. You wish you could take your hand off the keyboard and have it still sound. And you can on a keyboard with a pad sound, but on a violin, as soon as you take your fingers off those strings, then you lose the pitch of those notes. And so there's going to be like this weird gap between this chord and that chord as you shift your fingers. So I'm pretty sure that you actually meant that to be 2 strings. But yeah, so Carol, I assume that you're a string player. So yeah, absolutely. So, but this is good advice. So I'm glad that you knew that. But I'm pointing that out then for anyone else who might not be aware. Violins are capable of playing 2 notes at once, but only certain combinations, and you don't want to just sustain. You don't want to even sustain one. Tone quality wise, it's not going to be your best sound ever. So it's maybe not the best sound for this in general, but it's also not something you want to do for 100 measures straight. So yeah, glad that's not what you meant. And anyone else who's writing footballs realize that that's what's going on. So in any case, those are the things I really want to kind of look at these pieces together and talk about those aspects about them. Here we have all in Sam's piece specifically, we have all these nice jazz waltz rhythms. And one of the things to know about a jazz waltz rhythm is this idea that we have 3/4, but we are basically boom, 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 boom as our pulse, but 1 and of 2, 1 and of 2 is a typical subdivision that we have there. And there's all sorts of ways of subdividing the beat and the way that the drums, if we just focused on the drums for a second, sorry, when I click, I lose them. The fact that it's also placing this accent here on the and of 2, and then here we have an and of 2 and an and of 3. The way these rhythms lock together are part of what defines jazz waltz rhythm. And in Dean's piece, it's the fact that he copied this rhythmic pattern, this gesture, to use that word again, from the Bach prelude, is part of what gives this piece its charm. I think, Sam, you did a great job of writing out something that sounds like an improvised piano solo here. Right? That totally sounds like something I would have improvised. That little kind of hemiola-ish figure, this sort of triplet thing that keeps turning the beat around, right? Because the triplet itself is on, it's like 3 beats starting on the middle of the triplet, and then starting on a beat, and then starting on the middle, and then starting on the beat, right? So it's a hemiola figure built out of that triplet, and that's really beautiful also. So I just want to take a quick look, see what else I've missed. So yeah, so when players can do circular breathing for limited times, Dave, and people have actually physically passed out from trying to do that too much. So yeah, it's a technique that you use when you know how to do it and know what people can do, but you don't write a minute of people holding those things. Really, literally, they will rebel and they will pass out and they will get lightheaded. Now, if you have a big section, you can stagger them and say, okay, you guys take the first 8 bars, then you guys take the next 8 bars. If you have a big section, you can do that kind of thing. So open strings are, yeah, so good job answering that there, Carol. So I'm glad to have, I assume that you are a string player. I'm going to look at your piece next time because I saw that one in there, and I'm going to pick up with that in sometime in the next couple of weeks. So yes, Sam, also exploding that staff would have given you the 2 staves. So if anyone who hasn't seen that, I could go to the violin. I could add another violin. I can go to strings, bowed, violin. It'll add a second violin there. And then I can select from the beginning to the end of the score and go back to the beginning here so you can see, how did I lose my place? That doesn't really matter. I've selected it all, and then say Tools, Explode. And now you'll see that what were double stops are now duplicated between the staves. So that's something you can do. If you like to write it on one staff for simplicity and then explode it, there you go. That's how to do it. All right. So thanks everyone for all the music. I've really enjoyed talking about all the different things that people have been up to here. Next week, feel free to just keep writing whatever, and I'll talk about things that have already been submitted. Starting next week, I'll start kind of maybe focusing on maybe another topic. I feel like Sonata Form is something I want to talk about because it's such a fundamental form to so much music. So I'm probably going to talk about that some. So that said, hope you've all enjoyed the presentation this week. It's brought to you by the Mastering MuseScore School. So by all means, check out the pinned link at the top and check out all the courses I offer and so forth. And again, I keep giving these cryptic and maybe not so cryptic references to this new community site that I'm looking at building that I kind of started playing around with, and I really hope to build a launch in the next couple of weeks. I think you'll really enjoy having a place to go to post your music and just have discussions with each other, get feedback, and so forth. So I'm really excited by what's coming. So stick around for future episodes then, and all the great things that are to come. So I'll see you next week if I don't talk to you before. So